This is Dick Moore in KBOX Action Central News. The word, and this word from Washington. Government sources in Washington say President Kennedy is dead. It happened in Dallas, Texas today. The president and Governor John Connally gunned down as they rode in an open car in the west downtown area. An assassin's gunfire crashing out from a fifth floor window, apparently an automatic rifle about a .30 caliber. Both men rushed to Parkland Hospital. The president, they tell us, is dead. The condition of Governor Connally has not been determined. Police have one suspect in custody. They said they got a good description of the man, about 30 years old, a white man. And we also have one Dallas detective reported dead on arrival at Parkland Hospital. It's not known whether this shooting was tied up with the president's death. Dick Moore, KBOX News.
This is KBOX at 1480 in Dallas. We'll keep you in touch with our Action Central News sources and give you the complete story of the president's death.
When the boss says take a break,
Me for 7 Up!
when you need to stay awake,
Me for 7 Up!
when your taste buds need a thrill, when you're hot and need a chill, don't drink that stuff that makes you ill.
Order 7 Up!
So wholesome, mothers give 7-Up to babies. Just ask your doctor about 7-Up.
Nearly twice as much you get for only pennies more.
Super King 7 Up!
You pour and pour and pour.
Now back to KBOX Action Central.
Carl King reporting on the latest information. Confirmation, the president is dead. He died in a Parkland hospital after being cut down by assassin's bullets while his motorcade was moving along the outskirts of Dallas. The shots apparently coming from the fifth floor of the Texas School Book Depository building. One witness said he saw the rifle being withdrawn from the window after the shots were fired. Latest information on Texas Governor John Connally is he still remains in critical condition. His wounds are apparently from the back, below the shoulder blade. One bullet apparently striking the governor. The president was reported to have been hit in the head by the assassin's bullets. Some people thinking the bullets came from another automatic type weapon. Other reports indicate that it was just a rifle. The latest report, confirmation from Parkland Hospital, the president is dead. We're waiting further information from the downtown scene to what is going on in downtown Dallas. Vice President Johnson's wife, after a quick check on conditions in the emergency section, said her husband was unharmed in the gunfire. The vice president riding in another car from the president. The vice president was somewhere in the hospital. It is impossible to determine his precise whereabouts at once. He was reported badly shot by the shooting. Doctors trying to keep him as quiet as possible. There is a report that the vice president also had been wounded, but this was denied by Mrs. Johnson. First word of the president's death came from two priests as they left Parkland Hospital's emergency ward where the president was taken. Their announcement brought audible sobs from a crowd of scores of newsmen and other citizens. Confirmation of the president's death came quickly from Washington. The president died at 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, 1 o'clock Dallas time, some 39 minutes ago. We're awaiting further information from the downtown area of Dallas. And I believe one of our mobile units is standing by now for a report.
Ron Jenkins, along with News Director Bill Hampton at Parkland, it's confirmed President Kennedy has been assassinated. A newsman talking to two priests who left Parkland Hospital about 15 minutes ago asked them what they thought. They said he was dead. They had administered last rites of the Catholic Church. Father Oscar Hubert, 53, of Holy Trinity Catholic Church, administering the last rites. A newsman asking one of the priests if the president was dead. The priest said, quote, "He's dead all right," end quote. For further details, Bill Hampton.
Right, Ron. The only way to describe the scene here at the hospital right now is grief, and much of it. Women along the hallways of this huge hospital, all crying, some hysterical, some have fainted. Many grown men, big men, walking down the hallways, standing in shock, tears rolling down their cheeks. Their president has been assassinated today in Dallas, Texas. Bill Hampton, KBOX News.
And this word just into KBOX News. Senator Ralph Yarbrough talking with newsmen just before the announcement of the president's death today. Yarbrough collapsed in sobs as he told of witnessing the slaying, and police say they have one suspect in their custody. Again, though, the President of the United States, John Kennedy, dead of an assassin's bullet in Dallas, Texas. The condition of Governor John Connally, who was riding in the same car and who was also gunned down, has not been determined. Mrs. Lyndon Johnson said that her husband was not harmed. He apparently escaped. One in custody, a president dead, a governor critically wounded. We'll have more details in just a few moments.
The President of the United States is dead. John F. Kennedy, 46 years old, in his first term in the White House. Mr. Kennedy riding in a car, an open car, when he was shot to death by an assassin, his wife with him. She cried, "Oh no," grabbed the President as he fell. He was rushed to Parkland Hospital. He was pronounced dead a short time later, last rites administered by Catholic priest. The governor of Texas, John Connally, also taken to Parkland Hospital. He suffered several gunshot wounds, however, at Parkland now. They say his condition must remain undetermined. He is in surgery. A police suspect in custody. Officers looking for another man. It happened like this, apparently. The motorcade traveling in the west downtown area on Elm Street near Houston. Gunfire crashing out from a fifth-floor window. The president pitching to the floor of the car, the governor also. Mrs. Kennedy cradling her husband's head in her lap, sobbing no, oh no. The wounds in Governor Connally's chest were clearly visible. The Vice President of the United States now, the President of the United States, apparently escaped unharmed. Newsman who talked with his wife, KBOX newsman, said that she said her husband was all right. Senator Ralph Yarbrough was in the waiting room of Parkland Hospital when the word was passed, the President is dead. Yarbrough collapsed in tears. No motive for the shooting. Apparently, at least 3 shots from a high-powered rifle crashing from the window, hitting the president and the governor of Texas. Word continuing to come into the KBOX newsroom. Lyndon Johnson, the new president of the United States, leaves the Dallas hospital where President Kennedy died. Johnson, accompanied by his wife. Newsman had no opportunity to question him, but as we did say, Senator Ralph Yarbrough collapsed in tears when he heard the news. And the shots that downed the president and governor appeared to have come from, now they say, a grassy hill near the street the motorcade was moving on. The first report was from a fifth-store window. In the turmoil, confusion reigning, and impossible to tell whether the Secret Service agents and police returned the gunfire. The president was shot in the right temple. A simple matter of a bullet right through the head, said Dr. George Berkeley, White House medical officer. Those 5 words, a bullet through the head. At about the same time, a Dallas detective was dead of a gunshot wound at Parkland. It's not been immediately determined whether this shooting was linked with the outbreak of gunfire against the president. The city of Dallas, we talked to several people, many at the hospital. There's only one word. People are stunned. They can hardly believe it. The President of the United States shot to death. For late developments, back to KBOX News.
Now, the President of the United States has been assassinated, and also one of the Secret Service men assigned to guard him against such an occurrence which happened here this afternoon. I'll repeat that. It's official now. 2 deaths this afternoon at the hands of an assassin. Dallas police have recovered a foreign-made rifle believed to be a .30-30, and the young man is now being questioned by law authorities. The last rites were administered to the now deceased President Kennedy at officially 1:15 this afternoon by 2 priests who were brought here to the hospital for the last rites. The identity of one of the priests is of Father Hubert. I couldn't get the identity of the other. Death officially announced shortly after 1 o'clock this afternoon. And the word just in, a Secret Service man, has also expired. Governor Connally, who was wounded in the wrist and the left shoulder, is now under surgery here at Parkland Hospital. Bill Hampton, KBOX News.
On this Black Friday afternoon, a word from KBOX General Manager Ned Sheridan.
An expectant crowd of some 3,000 persons lined the Trade Mart in downtown Dallas today. Most of them had been served their steak and potatoes without being aware that anything untoward had happened at all. True, the presidential party was somewhat late in arriving, but all of those diners had been out of touch with their transistor and car radios for up to an hour. As the ladies and gentlemen began eating the luncheon served, this observer noted a number of newsmen gathering in tiny knots throughout the dining area. It was though an electric shock had passed through me as I got up from the table and approached a group of such newsmen. No one would say a word. The clink of ice in the glass, the silverware on the table, the scrape of chairs in the giant dining hall continued unabated as the presidential seal stood empty at the head table. At about the very time the president was shot, thousands of persons gathering outside the hall awaiting his arrival knew about it long before the diners became aware. Even after the president had died, people continued eating. They knew not what had happened. Newsmen with private lines from all over the world reaching into this Trade Mart were informed that something had happened. The first word reaching these newsmen awaiting the president was that he had been hurt. For about an hour thereafter, policemen still lined the route awaiting the party. Hundreds of children out of school for the occasion milled around, and only someone that knew what had happened would take a special note of the crowds around automobiles with radios. The highways in North Dallas are virtually clogged with people driving along at a snail's pace, listening to their automobile radios. The president is dead.
And the first official reaction is beginning to come in from overseas. KBOX News just received this from Moscow. Moscow's radio commentator in mournful tones announcing the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. He told the Russians, it said, he's been murdered by the extreme white right-wing elements. And here in Dallas, it's still, even newsmen who are accustomed to hard news are finding it extremely difficult to believe that the President of the United States of America was gunned down in broad daylight on a street in downtown Dallas. Mr. Kennedy, the father of two children, elected to the White House in November 1960, the nation's first Roman Catholic president. He narrowly defeated former Vice President Nixon. He was up for re-election next November. Vice President Lyndon Johnson will be sworn into office as soon as possible. He was rushed to the hospital and whisked away by Secret Service agents. His whereabouts are being kept a secret. He escaped injury. We understand now that the Vice President is already beginning to make plans to be sworn into office. He, the 36th President of the United States. Mr. Kennedy, the father of two children, elected to the White House in 1960. And the President and Mrs. Kennedy this morning, and it's been so many hours ago now, got an enthusiastic welcome from a large crowd when they landed at Dallas Love Field. No suspicion of the tragedy that was to follow. The First Lady walking with the President to shake hands with the crowd behind the barrier. She carried a bouquet of red roses, which clashed curiously with the color of her two-piece pink suit. She managed to keep the roses in hand while shaking hands with members of the crowd. At one point, Mrs. Kennedy almost lost one of her white gloves, but retrieved it quickly. Now that seems so unimportant. No Goldwater signs in the airport crowd. One segment of the crowd represented young Democrats of Southern Methodist University. That was the airport. Considerable female squealing over the president and lusty male shouts of, "Hey, Jackie." But as we said, that was many hours ago. Now, the president is dead. Senator Ralph Yarborough was riding 3 cars behind the president. He told us, and this is part of his statement, "You could tell something awful, something tragic had happened. I could see a Secret Service man in the president's car leaning on the car, his hands wringing in anger, anguish, and despair." He says, "I knew then that something tragic had happened." Yarborough tells us he counted 3 rifle shots as the presidential limousine left downtown Dallas through a triple underpass. The shots fired from above, possibly from one of the bridges or from a nearby building. Now they tell us there's a good possibility it was fired from a grassy hill nearby. Conflicting reports on suspects. One report is that a suspect is in county jail. Another, that police are looking for another suspect. Another witness said he saw a gun emerge from an upper story of a warehouse commanding an unobstructed view of the presidential car. Kennedy, the first president to be assassinated since William McKinley was shot back in 1901. The first death of a president in office since Franklin D. Roosevelt. He died of hemorrhage at Warm Springs, Georgia, April 1945. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover immediately made all of his agents and facilities available to Dallas authorities to help apprehend those guilty of the assassination of President Kennedy. Hoover telephoning city officials moments after he received word of the shooting. And Governor Conley, right now undergoing an operation for a gunshot wound in his chest. His condition is still undetermined, but at the scene, the gaping wound in his chest was clearly visible. He and the president both fell by the assassin's bullets. Both men's wives riding in the cars with them at that time. Mrs. Kennedy cradled the president's head in her arms and said, "Oh, God, no." She was seen bending over him on the back seat of the car. And this word in from Parkland Hospital just now, they've got an official listing on Governor John Conley. His condition is serious with gunshot wounds, so that is the way it is. The President of the United States, John F. Kennedy, dead. The Governor of Texas, John Conley, in serious condition, the result of bullets fired by an assassin at their open cars that traveled in a motorcade in Dallas. And as Mr. Ned Sheridan, manager of KBOX, said a few moments ago, those at the luncheon were the last to know. They were eating their lunches, the President dying, they unaware. News of the assassin's attack on President Kennedy hit Congress like a thunderbolt. The leadership reacted with comments of, "Oh, God, this is terrible." Senate Democratic leader Mike Mansfield of Montana called to the Senate cloakroom telephone by a newsman, informed of the news flash on the attack of the chief executive and Texas Governor John Conley. All Mansfield could say, and I think this sums it up for America, for Dallas, "This is terrible. I can't find words." And that is just about the way Dallas is now. I can't find words at the scene.
News that the President and Governor Conley were shot down by an unknown assailant wielding a possible .30 caliber rifle. The motorcade suddenly aborted as the President and Governor Conley pitched to the floor of their limousine covered with blood. Secret Service men immediately stood up in the car, in their hands automatic machine guns. Hundreds of officers rushed to the scene, shotguns in hand. Hundreds of spectators dropped to the ground. Mrs. Kennedy shouted, "Oh my God, no." The statement, according to a Mr. Newman, a witness at the scene. Moments ago, a police officer reported to have been shot down at 10th and Patton in the Oak Cliff area. Several squads of police, approximately 20 men, ordered to the Oak Cliff area. The building, the Texas School Bank Depository, here at the shooting of the president, still being searched for a possible suspect. One suspect in the county jail. The area roped off to the public. A late word shows that the police officer was dead on arrival at Methodist Hospital. This word from Dallas Police, the president was dead on arrival also. A surgeon for Governor Conley from Galveston, he's being flown into Dallas at this time. He was shot in the wrist and the upper left chest. His condition undetermined. Detective Charlie Brown of the Dallas Homicide Department carried away a high-powered rifle from the scene of the shooting here in the downtown area. The assailant of Police Officer Tippett, captured in the Texas Theater on West Jefferson. And here in the downtown area, as we look to the tops of the buildings, we can see the flags flying half-mast. From the downtown area at the scene of the shooting, this is Sound Tape, KBOX Mobile News Unit number 4.
Another tape report from the scene, KBOX News.
Here at the hospital, authorities have just released word that Governor Conley is now in serious condition. Earlier, it was reported he was in satisfactory condition. His last words before slipping into a deep coma was, "Please take care of my wife." The governor received 2 gunshot wounds, one in the upper left chest and one in the wrist. According to unofficial sources, the chest wound is deep enough and bad enough where he lost much blood before he was taken into the emergency room of the hospital where he's still in surgery. Bill Hampton, KBOX News.
Another KBOX News report from the scene.
Sound page, KBOX Mobile News, again from the Texas School Book Depository. Reports from police and a witness here at the scene say that Dallas police recovered a high-powered rifle. Can you tell us, sir, what your name is and what they found?
Price, Charles D. Price. Telescopic rifle, looked like a 306, bolt action.
Where did they find it?
Somewhere around on Elm Street in one of the buildings.
Was it in the Texas School Book Depository building or another building?
They brought it down to the corner in the police car to take it for fingerprints.
Okay, sir, thank you. That's the latest development from the scene here of the shooting of President Kennedy. Sound page, KBOX Mobile News Unit number 4.
And Governor Connolly's office received this word from Dallas today that all vital signs are good for the governor to survive. However, Parkland Hospital still carrying his condition as serious. The governor has lost considerable blood, they tell us. Extremely weak. He's in surgery and has lapsed into a coma. Connolly in the same car with President Kennedy when the chief executive killed. Bill Stinson, the governor's aide, said that Connolly was being prepared for surgery. He says all vital signs are good. The pulse normal, the blood pressure good, his color is good. He has lost a great deal of blood, though. Stinson said Connolly was hit by a bullet in the back that left his body. In the right chest area, a back rib was fractured. Stinson said Connolly also suffered a minor leg wound before lapsing into a coma. He said, please, take care of my wife. And what about these 2 wives riding in a car with these 2 brave men? Newsmen in the area, witnesses will probably never erase the memory of Mrs. Jacqueline Kennedy cradling the dying president's head in her lap. Governor Connolly, they tell us, is in surgery now, undergoing an operation that's almost been completed. In serious condition. We understand, though, that while the governor is not out of the woods, as they term it, his doctors said the vital signs are good, as we mentioned a moment ago.
Dick, we've just been in contact with Dr. W.T. White, superintendent of the Dallas school system. Have you had anything as yet onto the situation of the school closing in Dallas?
No, Jerry, we haven't.
Dr. White has told KBOX Action Central that he has instructed principals of all schools in the Dallas school system to fly the flags at half-mast, but schools will not be dismissed until the regular dismissal time, the reason for that being a severe transportation problem. Dr. White went on to tell us that any parent who wished to pick up their child at the school from now until dismissal time, which is in approximately an hour and a half, would be allowed to do so. So if you have children in the Dallas public schools, they will not be officially dismissed until the normal dismissal time, but Dr. White says that you will be allowed to pick up your children if you so desire.
Yes, the flags of Dallas flying at half-mast, the hearts of Dallas flying at half-mast. Now for another direct report from the scene.
KBOX Mobile News Unit number 4, again from the Texas School Book Depository building. Dallas police officers here at this scene advised me that they captured a suspect in the shooting. The shootings of police officer Tippett, he was dead on arrival at Methodist, of President Kennedy, and also of Governor Connolly. He has admitted all 3 shootings. Whether it's true or not, we do not know, but police officers advised me here at the scene that the man has admitted everything, all 3 shootings. From the downtown area, this is Sound Page, KBOX Mobile News Unit number 4.
This is Bill Hampton in the KBOX newsroom. This bulletin just in, a Secret Service agent and a Dallas policeman were shot and killed today. They were shot some distance from the area where President Kennedy was assassinated. No other information on these other 2 deaths immediately available. From Stockholm, Sweden, Prime Minister Taj Erlander commented, "I don't want to say anything now." Also in Europe, these comments at The Hague, a Foreign Office spokesman said the Netherlands government, quote, expressed deep felt horror about the terrible attack on President Kennedy. Deep and strong sympathy is felt in all of Holland, both for the American people and President Kennedy. In that low-lying nation in Eastern Europe, radio bulletins were heard in great rapidity. The news was given at once to Queen Juliana. I might comment that it's been the tradition of this country to inaugurate a new president within 12 hours after any assassination attempt was successful. So we can look for Lyndon B. Johnson to be the next president of the United States within the next 12 hours. That inauguration will take place somewhere here in the state of Texas. At this moment, you may presume that the Chief Justice of the United States, Earl Warren, is now being flown to somewhere in Texas to inaugurate Lyndon Johnson as the 35th President of the United States.
And now for another direct report from the scene.
KBOX Mobile News Unit number 4, again from the Texas School Book Depository Building. Dallas police officers here at this scene advised me that they captured a suspect in the shooting. The shootings of police officer Tippett. He was dead on arrival at Methodist, of President Kennedy, and also of Governor Connally. He has admitted all 3 shootings. Whether it's true or not, we do not know, but police officers advised me here at the scene that the man has admitted everything, all 3 shootings. From the downtown area, this is Sam Page, KBOX Mobile News Unit number 4.
Right, Sam, now back in the KBOX newsroom. Other details of the tragedy in Dallas today. Mr. Kennedy's brother Robert, the Attorney General in Washington, was having lunch at the time of the tragedy at his home in McLean, Virginia. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover called the FBI office in Dallas immediately following the assassination, and he ordered an all-out investigation of the mishap. I was at the hospital shortly after the mishap today. I can say in 10 years of reporting, I've never seen anything like it. Literally thousands of people crying in an extreme state of shock. Many grown men crying, women fainting, hysteria everywhere. Everyone was stunned and in deep grief. There's no other way to describe it. And this word from Austin, Lieutenant Governor Preston Smith termed President Kennedy's assassination today the darkest day in the history of the great state of Texas. He says, "Words are not possible for me to express my feelings over the barbaric actions which occurred today." That statement by Lieutenant Governor Preston Smith in a statement to newsmen moments ago. He went on, quote, "This day probably was the darkest day in the history of the great state of Texas. It simply has to be the act of a fanatic with a distorted mind. It is a sad tragedy, leaving millions of Texans and other people in the country and world sad and shocked that something like this could happen in Texas or anywhere in America."
Bill, I have an emergency message from the Bell Telephone Company. The Dallas office of the Bell Telephone Company has just been in contact with KBOX Action Central. Have 2 very important messages. The public has been besieging Parkland Hospital with telephone calls with regard to the condition of the Governor, Connally, and also with official confirmation as to the President's condition. They're having serious equipment difficulty, which could hamper the entire communications system of Dallas. They ask, please, that you refrain from calling Parkland Hospital, and also that you refrain from all calls in Dallas unless they are of an emergency message. So please refrain from calling Parkland Hospital and use the utmost discretion in any telephone calls in Dallas.
Right, thank you. Soon after the president was assassinated this afternoon in Dallas, a white man in his mid-20s, as yet unidentified, was arrested in the Riverside section of Fort Worth. The man, who has black curly hair and who wore a red shirt, denied he was connected with the presidential assassination. His hands handcuffed, he was taken to the Fort Worth City Jail. We've also received word officially there have been 3 deaths today in the city: a Secret Service man, a Dallas policeman, and of course the president. What of the president's cabinet? 6 members of the presidential cabinet were out of the country flying to Japan this afternoon when the president was killed. An hour and a half out of Honolulu, the secretaries were advised of the death. They immediately turned back. Even as the 2 clergymen hovered over the fallen president in the hospital emergency room, doctors and nurses administered blood transfusions. Officially, the president died of a gunshot wound in the brain at approximately 1 p.m. Central Standard Time this afternoon, according to an announcement by acting White House Press Secretary Malcolm Kilduff. The new president, Lyndon Johnson, and his wife left the hospital a half hour later. Newsmen had no opportunity to question them. The horror of the killing was mirrored in an eyewitness account by Senator Ralph Yarbrough, Democrat of Texas, who had been riding 3 cars behind Mr. Kennedy. He said, "You could tell something awful and tragic had happened." The senator told newsmen, before Kennedy's death became officially known. The senator told me personally that he heard 3 distinct shots, perhaps more. It sounded like rifle fire to him. He said a Secret Service man told everyone to lie low, as it were. He said then the motorcade speeded up at a tremendous rate of speed to evade any further bullets from the assassin's rifle.
We take you now to KBOX Action Central and Dick Moore.
And here, the city of Dallas still in a state of stunned shock this afternoon. Here's the tragic score as we have it now. 3 persons dead, including the President of the United States, the victim of snipers' bullets, 2 police officers, a Dallas detective, a Secret Service man, the governor of Texas, John Connally, in serious condition at Parkland Hospital, bullet wounds. Police say they have a good suspect. They say he's admitted killing all 3 men doing the shooting. They're checking it out extremely closely, though, to be sure that the man they have is the right man. Meanwhile, the search goes on. And now, for another direct report from the scene, this word.
And this late word from Dallas Police. Sarah T. Hughes, federal judge, en route from Parkland Hospital to Love Field to swear in Lyndon B. Johnson as President of the United States. This late word, Sarah T. Hughes, to swear in Lyndon Johnson, President of the United States. Sound 8 for KBOX News.
As we said a few moments ago, the Vice President, Lyndon Johnson, apparently escaping any serious injury, any injury at all for that matter. Lieutenant Governor Preston Smith termed President Kennedy's assassination the darkest day in the history of the great state of Texas. In a statement to newsman, Irwin says, "Words are not possible for me to express my feelings over the barbaric actions which occurred today." Smith said in a statement to newsmen, "This day, probably the darkest day in the history of the great state of Texas. It simply has to be the act of a fanatic with a distorted mind." Continuing, "It's a sad tragedy, leaving millions of Texans and other people in the country and world sad and shocked that something like this could happen in Texas, in America." Continued Smith, "As Lieutenant Governor of Texas, I officially extend every sympathy possible to the President's family and Mrs. Connally. Thank goodness the governor was not incapacitated." In broad daylight, on Dallas streets, today, the President of the United States fell by a sniper's bullet and killed. Now another KBOX direct report.
No, Dick, I was just going to add here directly from the newsroom some added comments on the tragedy which occurred in Dallas today. President Kennedy had brought his whirlwind tour of Texas to Dallas after beginning the 2nd day of the trip. 2 speeches in the sister city of Fort Worth, one on a parking lot, another at a breakfast. The chief executive stressed national defense in a region that had been critical of his foreign policies. He told his Fort Worth audiences that the United States will test next month the Saturn booster rocket that will put the country ahead of the Soviet Union in the outer space race. The president defended the controversial TFX fighter plane contract that went to General Dynamics of Fort Worth over Boeing aircraft of Seattle. He said it was an investment in freedom and would save taxpayers at least $1 billion. He said this is because the same basic plane can be used by the Navy as well as Air Force, saving the cost of building separate planes for the 2 services. Former Vice President Richard Nixon had left Dallas a few hours before the president arrived. The man whom President Kennedy beat in the 1960 presidential race was in Dallas on official business, according to him, a non-political trip. He'd walked through a large crowd that had gathered at Dallas's Love Field during the morning, awaiting the arrival of President Kennedy.
Now, another direct report.
This is KBOX 1480 in Dallas.
This is Bill Hampton in the KBOX newsroom. We've just received this bulletin off Associated Press Wire. Vice President Lyndon Johnson, somewhere in the state of Texas, presumably in the Dallas area, has now officially been sworn in as the 36th President of the United States. No further details available. It's presumed that he was, just a moment, further details coming in. I'm reading directly off the AP wire now. Lyndon B. Johnson was sworn in as President of the United States at about 1:38 p.m. Central Standard Time this afternoon. The oath was administered by U.S. District Judge Sarah T. Hughes, presumably somewhere in the Dallas area. Unofficial reports say that the new inauguration ceremonies took place at Love Field, close to downtown Dallas. Dick?
We hate to continually dwell on the words stunned and unbelievable, but this afternoon, those two words explain all. A crowd of stunned Dallas citizens thronging around the hospital, Parkland Hospital, where the president died. The ambulance which took the body from the institution forced almost to a halt at one point because of the silent, waiting people. Adding to the tragedy was the fact that both Mr. Kennedy's children will have birthdays within the next week. So, for another direct KBOX report.
This is KBOX 1480 in Dallas. We take you now to Action Central for a direct report from Sam Pate.
The 36th President of the United States of America. The former Texas governor was sworn in the air. Thusly, Lyndon B. Johnson becomes the second Texan to become President of the United States, the first being Dwight D. Eisenhower. Lyndon Johnson officially sworn in as President of the United States moments ago aboard the presidential airliner en route to Washington, carrying the new president and the body of John F. Kennedy. KBOX Mobile News.
A brief recap of the tragic events that have happened today. President Kennedy is dead. The victim of an assassin's bullet. Governor John Connally of Texas, who was riding with the president and was also shot, undergone surgery for a bullet wound in his chest. They tell us from Parkland Hospital now that Connally's condition is satisfactory. Lyndon Johnson, the new president, was not hurt. A short time after the assassination, Dallas police arrested a man in connection with the shooting of a policeman, that man being interrogated to see if he had anything to do with the slaying of the president. A black day in Big D. Dallas flags and Dallas hearts are flying at half-mast. Now a report on a Dallas policeman slain in the line of duty, checking out an attempt on an assassin.
In Dallas this afternoon, Dallas Police Detective J.D. Tippett lies dead in the course of duty protecting the chief executive's life, but to vain. Police Detective J.D. Tippett, along with his partner M.M. McDonald, were tipped by an usher of the Texas Theater in Oak Cliff that a man in a brown shirt had entered the theater. Police detectives thought the man to be the one responsible for the assassination death of John F. Kennedy. Bravely entering the theater with gun drawn, J.D. Tippett, police detective, and M.M. McDonald of the Dallas Police Department found the man when he fled, 2 shots being fired out. Detective Tippett firing into the air, the fugitive firing and striking Detective Tippett, killing him. However, Detective Tippett's partner, Detective M.M. McDonald, in a brief fight that ensued, arrested the man, and as the handcuffs were being slapped on him, the fugitive in the brown shirt shouted, "It's all over now." The fugitive now in custody in the Dallas Police Department as the prime suspect in the assassination death of President John F. Kennedy. KBOX Mobile News.
This is KBOX 1480 in Dallas.
We now have Sam Pate, KBOX News, with a Mobile report.
And the 25-year-old suspect that's in police custody, wanted for shooting Officer J.D. Tippett at the Texas Theater in Oak Cliff, uttered these words to police officers moments ago: "I killed me a president and a cop, now all I need is 2 more. Police officers found the rifle in the Sexton building, the school book depository building in the downtown area just off of Elm Street. 1 bullet left in the chamber that was not fired. Apparently they figured that their job was well done, didn't need to fire the other shot. And just moments ago, an explosion reported on North Haven at the YMCA. I'm en route to that scene at this time to check out all details. This is Sam Pate, KBOX Mobile News Unit number 4 from City Hall.
Now we switch to Tom Murphy, who has an unusual angle to today's tragedy in the city of Dallas.
Unusual, perhaps. Unusual because it could perhaps never happen again in a lifetime. And perhaps nothing so emotional has ever happened to any city or any nation, no matter how far we go back. Today was a day of joy. At the airport early this morning, about 9 o'clock, the crowd started to gather under a very gray sky It was windy and wet and rainy. People looked around as if to say, I wonder how many people will be here today. And as the morning progressed and the excitement mounted, the crowd mounted. And by 11 o'clock, Love Field was perhaps one of the most exciting places in the world. Children with little signs, adults with bigger signs.
I repeat, police have found a foreign-made rifle. Sheriff's officers are questioning a young man picked up at the scene. Vice President Lyndon Johnson, now the president, was in the same motorcade. He was not hurt. Witnesses say they heard 3 loud bursts of gunfire. Shortly before Mr. Kennedy's death became known, he was administered the last rites of his church, the Roman Catholic Church. He had been the first Roman Catholic president in our history. Even as the 2 clergymen hovered over the fallen president in the emergency room of the hospital, doctors and nurses administered blood transfusions, but to no avail. The chief executive died officially of a gunshot wound in the brain at approximately 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, according to an announcement by acting White House Press Secretary Malcolm Kilduff. The new president, Lyndon Johnson, and his wife left the hospital a half hour later. Newsmen at the time had no opportunity to ask them questions. The horror, the terror, the shock of the assassination today was clearly visible in an eyewitness account given to newsmen in front of the hospital by Senator Ralph Yarbrough, Democrat of Texas, who had been riding 3 cars behind Mr. Kennedy. He said, "You could tell something awful and tragic had happened." The senator told newsmen just before Mr. Kennedy's death became known. When Mr. Yarbrough learned officially of the president's death, he broke down and wept. 3 of America's last 4 presidents have faced bullets of an assassin. Of the nation's 34 chief executives, 3 have been slain in office. On November the 1st, 1950, 2 Puerto Ricans tried to shoot their way into Blair House across the street from the White House, where President Harry Truman was then staying. 1 gunman was killed. The other is now serving a life term. One of the guards trying to protect President Truman at the time was also killed. On February the 15th, 1933, anarchist Joseph Segarra shot at President-elect Franklin Delano Roosevelt in Miami. The bullet missed Mr. Roosevelt, but did fatally wound Mayor Anton J. Cermak of Chicago. Today came the shots at President John Kennedy. Of the last 4 men elected to the White House, only Dwight D. Eisenhower saw no attempt on his life whatsoever. The presidents killed in our history by an assassin: Abraham Lincoln, James A. Garfield, and William McKinley, and today, of course, John Kennedy. We'll have further details on the tragic mishap which has occurred in Dallas today momentarily.
You're listening to KBOX 1480 in Dallas.
The Secret Service tells KBOX News that President Kennedy was apparently shot by a high-powered Army or Japanese rifle, about 25 caliber. Dallas police say he was shot from a warehouse in which people were working. They found the remains of fried chicken and paper on the 5th floor. Said the sniper apparently had been there for some time. The assassin, the man in custody, 30 years old, slender build, weighs about 165 pounds, stands 5 feet 10 inches tall. He has blonde hair, is balding, dressed in ragged-looking trousers and a sports shirt. And the surgeon who attended Kennedy at the hospital, Dr. Malcolm Perry, says he couldn't tell whether the president might have been shot once or twice. Perry said when he arrived at the emergency room, he noticed the president was in extremely critical condition, a bullet wound in the neck and head. He said immediate resumptive measures taken, and Dr. Kemp Clark, chief of neurosurgery, called along with several other members of the staff. He said they arrived immediately, but at that point the president's condition was critical and hopeless. The doctor said an oxygen machine was used, blood and fluid were administered, an electrocardiograph machine attached to record any heartbeat, a heartbeat that wasn't there. When asked to specify, Dr. Perry said the bullet apparently entered the front of the president's head. And about our new president, Lyndon Johnson, automatically becoming president with Kennedy's death, the presidential oath which he took later is, "I do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States and will do the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of these United States." At 6 feet 3, weighing close to 200 pounds, Johnson has always been supercharged with energy. He's been called self-centered at times, considerate at others, a humanitarian, power-hungry. A shrewd opportunist and a political genius, tough yet vulnerable, vain, friendly, sensitive, flamboyant. Friends and others who watched him on his rise over the decades agreed that he was just flexible enough or human enough to have been all of those things at one time or another. Johnson himself once said of himself, "I am also a liberal, a conservative, a Texan, a taxpayer, a rancher, a businessman, a consumer, a parent, a voter, and not as young as I used to be either, nor as old as I expect to be, and I'm all those things in fixed order." Present at the swearing in of Johnson, Mrs. Kennedy, Mrs. Johnson, several staff members, several congressmen. Johnson asked as many of the White House people as possible to crowd into the executive suite of the plane to witness the swearing-in ceremony. Judge Sarah Hughes weeping as she administered the presidential oath to Johnson. The presidential plane took off immediately for Washington with Johnson, Mrs. Kennedy, and some White House aides aboard. Officers at Andrews Air Force Base in Maryland say President Kennedy's body will arrive later this evening. It's being transported aboard the plane that also carries the new president, Lyndon Johnson, the new First Lady, Mr. Kennedy's widow. Dallas and the nation reeling, asking why. Americans sharing the instant reaction expressed by Mrs. Jacqueline Kennedy as she held the head of her dying husband in her lap and cried, "Oh God, no." Another spokesman says Attorney General Robert Kennedy, remaining at his estate at McLean, Virginia. The other brother, Senator Edward Kennedy, presiding over the Senate when the news came. He went to his office but left it. His staff says it's not known where he went. A workman told Kennedy's parents at Hyannisport, Massachusetts, they had no comment. Activity in Washington and the executive branch of Congress at a standstill. Stock exchanges, commodity markets closing quickly. Prices on the New York stock market had gone into a tailspin. It was closed quickly. White House staff members, from the president's closest confidants to ushers, standing clustered around radio and television sets, news tickers waiting for news from Dallas. The news from Dallas today was bad. The Senate recessed after a prayer. The Senate chaplain, the Reverend Frederick Brown Harris, praying that the senators and the people of the country be strong, be steady, and that God save the state. The Security and Exchange Commission appealing to all stock exchanges to close promptly. Most of them already had. And she heard earlier on KBOX News from the Dallas Police Department, Homicide Detective Captain Will Fritz says it looks good. He's talking about a suspect they have. A man that said, and we quote his very words, "I've killed me a cop and the president. Now I'm going to get me two more." We'll be back in just a moment.
A Dallas policeman has been shot and killed while chasing a suspected assassin of the president through the movie theater in Oak Cliff section of Dallas. He was shot to death as he and a fellow officer ran into the rear exit of the theater while following a tip that the assassin might be inside. The other officer rushed the suspect. The man yelled, "It's all over now." And as the officer grabbed him, the two fell struggling into a seat. The officer's face was slashed, but he managed to arrest the suspect. The 24-year-old man who said 2 years ago he wanted Russian citizenship was questioned to see whether he had any connection with the assassination of the president. He was identified as Lee Harvey Oswald of Fort Worth. He was pulled screaming and yelling from the Texas Theater in the Oak Cliff section shortly after a Dallas policeman was shot to death. On November 1, 1959, Oswald told the U.S. Embassy in Moscow he had applied for Soviet citizenship. He said he had been a tourist in Russia since October the 13th that year. Oswald was reported to have a Russian wife. Oswald put up a wild fight in the theater. He brandished a pistol which officers took away from him after the scuffle. Police officer M.N. McDonald, who was caught across the face in the scuffle, quoted Oswald as saying, after he was subdued, "Well, it's all over now. I got me a president, I got me a cop. I need two more." A large crowd had congregated around the theater and witnessed the arrest. Police had to hold the crowds back because many apparently connected the arrested man with the slaying of the president. The slain officer was identified as J.D. Tippit. Oswald is about 5 foot 9 inches tall, weighing approximately 160 pounds. He has blonde hair and is balding. He was dressed in ragged-looking trousers and a tan sports shirt. President Kennedy was shot through the head and neck as he rode through Dallas in the presidential limousine in what had been a triumphal motorcade. When the shots were fired at about 12:30 p.m. Dallas time, the chief executive slumped forward. Mrs. Kennedy turned in the seat ahead of him and cried, "Oh no," in anguish and horror. She tried to cradle his head in her arms as the limousine took off at top speed for Parkland Hospital, where Kennedy died a half hour later. Kennedy's body was removed from Parkland Hospital at 2:05 Dallas time in a lengthy cream-colored ambulance with off-white curtains tightly drawn. Mrs. Kennedy rode in a passenger seat in that ambulance, the type of vehicle with 2 seats for passengers. She and the body of Kennedy were escorted from the emergency entrance of Parkland Hospital by 2 motorcade officers. Mrs. Kennedy walked out of the back door of the emergency entrance as the body was also taken out. She walked slowly, looked around in a dazed manner, and appeared to be in a state of shock. Those who saw her enter the hospital an hour and a half earlier said she had not been hysterical at the time. Secret Servicemen directed Dallas police to remove spectators and newsmen from 50 to 100 yards away before the body was taken from the hospital. A crowd of several thousand had been waiting at the Dallas Trade Mart on the outskirts of the downtown section to hear the luncheon address by the president. A stunned hush fell over the crowd as word of the tragedy spread. Many who had looked forward to dining with the chief executive broke down and cried. The main body of the White House press corps was at the rear of the motorcade during the motorcade, riding in 2 buses. These men and women who had covered the president's activities in life from day to day knew nothing of the shooting until they had reached the Trade Mart. An ominous sense of dread had struck the reporters, however, within seconds after the shooting. It was apparent that the neatly ordered motorcade was falling apart, that city police were leaving the route in haste, escorting the car to the Parkland Hospital emergency. Governor John Connolly's office in Austin has issued this statement. He is in the operating room. The doctors have opened his chest. He will probably be 2 more hours to undergo orthopedic surgery. The open chest revealed a number of broken ribs, bruised lungs. 1 lung collapsed by the bullets. It has been reinflated. He probably has 4 broken ribs and contused lung. The lung collapsed but has been reinflated. No serious artery damage to the heart. Blood pressure, pulse, still okay. President Kennedy was administered the last rites of the Roman Catholic Church shortly after he was carried into Parkland Hospital. He is the nation's first Catholic president. Emergency treatment given the dying president was described for newsmen by 2 physicians, Doctors Kemp Clark and Malcolm Perry. Dr. Perry says Kennedy suffered a neck wound, a bullet hole in the lower part of the neck. There was a second wound in the president's head. Perry was not certain whether it was inflicted by the same bullet. The physician said the president lost consciousness as soon as he was hit and never revived. We never had any hope of saving his life, said Perry, though 8 or 10 physicians attended him in a frantic but futile effort to keep the president alive. Clark, a brain surgeon, reported that Kennedy was given oxygen and blood transfusions, then was administered an anesthetic so an emergency tracheotomy could be performed. During his procedure, surgeons cut a hole in the president's windpipe in an attempt to ease his breathing. Perry said that shortly after he reached the hospital, the chief executive's heart action failed. There was no palpable pulse beat. The time of death announced officially at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time. Police believe the fatal volley was fired from a textbook warehouse overlooking the expressway down which the president's car was heading. Bob Jackson, a photographer of the Dallas Times-Herald, heard 1 shot, then 2 rapid bursts as he rode in an open convertible in the presidential motorcade. He said he looked up and saw 2 men peering from the upper story window of the warehouse. As he said he looked, he saw a rifle being drawn quickly back into the 6th floor window. Police began a massive search of the big structure, emptying it of all employees. Vice President Lyndon Johnson automatically succeeds to the presidency. The new chief executive took the oath of office at 2:39 p.m. Central Standard Time. For the first time in history, the oath was administered by a woman, U.S. District Judge Sarah T. Hughes. Johnson was sworn in aboard the presidential jet transport Air Force One at Dallas's Love Field. He then flew to Washington to take over the government which Kennedy had directed since January 20, 1961. Kennedy's body was aboard that plane. The president at the swearing in were Mrs. Kennedy and Mrs. Johnson, several staff members and several congressmen. Johnson asked as many of the White House people as possible to crowd to the executive suite of the plane to witness the ceremony. Judge Hughes wept as she administered the presidential oath to Johnson. The presidential plane took off immediately for Washington with Johnson, Mrs. Johnson, and Mrs. Kennedy and some White House aides aboard. Here is the presidential oath. I do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of the President of these United States and do the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of these United States.
This is KBOX 1480 in Dallas.
John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States, born May 29th, 1917 in Boston, died November 22nd, 1963, in Dallas. Kennedy, the first American chief executive to face the possibility of nuclear war. He risked it with a show of force to protect American interest, but later succeeded in achieving an agreement with Russia limiting nuclear test. On the domestic front, Mr. Kennedy, confronted by a racial problem which epitomized a contemporary world issue, the tense relationship between the blacks and the whites. Today, a crowd of stunned Dallas citizens thronging around the hospital where Kennedy died. They still can't believe it. What happened? Why did it happen? The ambulance which took the body from the institution forced almost to a halt at one point. Many people on the streets, silent people, waiting people, shocked people. Adding poignancy to the tragedy, the fact that both Kennedy children will have birthdays within the next week. Caroline, 6, on November 27. John Jr. will be 3 on the 25th of November. The president had flown to Texas on a goodwill tour, speaking to citizens in the major cities, and never one to neglect practical politics, doing what he could to quiet partisan infighting among the Democrats in Texas. The president and his aides had been very pleased with the way the trip had been going. In fact, a crowd of tens of thousands that saw Kennedy drive through Dallas toward his rendezvous with death, the largest and most enthusiastic of the journey. At the airport this morning at Love Field, President Kennedy, Jackie, shaking hands with milling crowds, happy crowds. Less than an hour later, the president was killed. In the 24 hours before he was murdered, the president was seen and enthusiastically cheered by several thousand Texans in San Antonio, Houston, Fort Worth, and Dallas. He planned to fly to the state capital of Austin this afternoon for a Democratic fundraising dinner, then to Johnson City to spend the night at the ranch of Lyndon Johnson's, maybe even a deer hunt tomorrow. From a personal point of view, I imagine the trip had been a particularly warming one for Mr. Kennedy because the First Lady had accompanied him, joining energetically in the round of public appearances and handshaking tours. In fact, the president got a hearty chuckle this morning when he mentioned an incident concerning Mrs. Kennedy. Said, "The First Lady isn't with me this morning. It takes her longer than it does me to get organized in the morning." But then he added, "She's a lot prettier, too." Mrs. Kennedy had not been with the president on any major speaking tour since the primary campaign that preceded his nomination as the Democratic candidate for president in 1960. During the 1960 election campaign, she was expecting their second child, John F. Kennedy, Jr. In more recent months, she'd abandoned her public schedule of activities following the birth and death of a second son, Patrick Bouvier Kennedy, in August. The death of the president, thus, the second tragedy to strike Mrs. Kennedy in less than 4 months. During their fateful hours in Texas, John and Jackie Kennedy had worked like a team in greeting the crowds that flocked in to see them. At almost every point where they were afoot and a crowd was gathered, Kennedy and his wife had approached their greeters to exchange handshakes and chit-chat. Governor Connally, now said to be in satisfactory condition at Parkland Hospital, and as you heard moments ago, Vice President Lyndon Johnson is no longer Vice President Lyndon Johnson. He is President Lyndon Johnson. Dallas police arresting a 24-year-old man, Lee Oswald, in connection with the slaying of a Dallas policeman. He's being interrogated to see if he had any connection with the killing of the president. Homicide Detective Captain Will Fritz says it looks like he's a good suspect. Oswald was pulled screaming and yelling from the Texas Theater in the Oak Cliff sector, had a pistol which officers took away from him after a scuffle. A policeman who was cut on the face in the scuffle quoted Oswald as saying, "Well, it's all over now. I've killed me a cop and the president. I'm going to get me 2 more. 2 law enforcement agency officers killed, a Dallas detective and a Secret Service man. A crowd had congregated around the theater. Witnesses said they saw police having to hold the crowds back because many apparently connected the arrested man with the slaying of the president, and they were mad. The officer who was slain, J.D. Tippit, killed by a man answering the description of Oswald in the neighborhood a short time before. Tippit had been slain with a pistol. Now, stand by in a few moments. We'll have a report from Parkland Hospital. That report coming up just momentarily. We can't help recall some of the happier moments today, this morning at Love Field, when the president and Jacqueline Kennedy, she dressed in a pert pink dress carrying a bouquet of roses. Red roses clashed violently with the dress. Both shaking hands with onlookers, hands stretched across the barricades. Mrs. Kennedy emerging from the plane first, an item of controversy in past years. President Kennedy finally bowing to protocol and following his wife from the plane. Now from that report from Parkland Hospital.
This is Jerry Kunkel in KBOX Action Central Mobile News, and I am at Parkland Hospital, just outside the emergency room. KBOX news sources have just spoken with Cliff Cassidy. Cliff Cassidy was the Dallas County campaign manager for John Connally when he ran for governor only last year. According to Cliff Cassidy, who had spoken with the attending physician of wounded Governor Connally now has a better than 50-50 chance of survival. Information is sketchy here at Parkland Hospital as to exactly the extent of the governor's injuries. However, there are 3 punctures in his body, one in his arm, one in his side, and one in his leg. Sources theorize, however, that 2 bullets struck Governor Connally, and the 3rd puncture was caused by one of the bullets leaving his body. An official news bulletin is scheduled to be released in about 4 minutes when the doctor will speak with the press corps. We are now heading toward the press room of Parkland Emergency Hospital. At the moment, according to Cliff Cassidy, the Dallas County Connally campaign manager, the governor has a better than 50-50 chance. For KBOX Action Central News, this is Jerry Kunkel.
The Secret Service says President Kennedy apparently was shot by a high-powered rifle, they think a .25 caliber, possibly a .306. Dallas police say he was shot from a warehouse in which the people were working. They have a suspect in custody. Captain Will Fritz says, "It looks like we have a good suspect." The man said, and we quote, "I've killed me a cop and a president, and now I'm going to kill me 2 more." 3 lives snuffed out, the President of the United States, 2 law enforcement agencies, a Dallas detective, a Secret Service man. The surgeon who attended President Kennedy at the hospital, Dr. Malcolm Perry, said he couldn't tell whether the president might have been hit once, maybe twice, he said. Said when he arrived at the emergency room, he noticed the president was in critical condition, a severe bullet wound in the head. He said immediate resumptive measures were taken. Dr. Kent Clark, chief of neurosurgery, called along with several other members of the staff. He said they arrived immediately, but at that point the president's condition was critical, hopeless. The doctor said an oxygen machine was used, blood and fluid administered, electrocardiograph machine attached to record any possible heartbeat. When asked to specify about the wound, the doctor said the president was shot in the forehead. Vice President Johnson, now President Lyndon Johnson, automatically becoming president with Kennedy's death. The presidential oath he took aboard the presidential plane: "I do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States and will do the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States." At 6'3", weighing close to 200 pounds, Johnson has always been charged with energy. And news of the attack and the death of the president hit Congress like a blow in the face today. The leadership reacted with comments of, "Oh my God, this is terrible." Senate Democratic leader Mike Mansfield of Montana, calling to the Senate cloakroom telephone, informed of the news flash on the attack on the chief executive and Texas Governor Connally. "It's terrible," Mansfield said. A hushed pause. He said, "I'm sorry, I can't find words." And they call us a center of conservative philosophy and finance in Big D. Here on October 24th, Adlai Stevenson, spat upon by one heckler, struck by another after making a United Nations Day address. It was believed that Mr. Kennedy's body will be moved shortly to Washington. Traditionally, funeral services for presidents who die in office are held in the capital city. Governor Connally, a Democrat, was wounded in the right chest. You heard that report a moment ago that his chances for survival appear to be better than 50-50. When Mrs. Kennedy reached Parkland Hospital, her clothing was covered with blood from her wounded husband. When he was shot, she cradled his head in her lap, said, "Oh, my God, no." The president, 46 years old, the youngest man ever to be elected to the presidency. The president's mother and father learned of the tragedy from a workman at their home in Hyannisport, Massachusetts. Neither commented. The president's father, Joseph P. Kennedy, a semi-invalid, the result of a stroke several years ago. And Senator Ralph Yarborough, waiting in the corridors of Parkland Hospital, when he learned of the death of the president, he broke down in sobs. The senator was in a car about 3 behind the president at the time of the shooting. Said, "I could see a Secret Service man in the president's car leaning on the car with his hands clasped in anger." He said, "I knew something was wrong. I knew then something tragic had happened. Just how tragic, I didn't know." Yarborough said he counted 3 rifle shots as the presidential limousine left downtown Dallas through a triple underpass. The shots fired from above, possibly from one of the bridges or from a nearby building. So the way it stands now, police say they have one good suspect in police custody. We should have more reports from there momentarily, and Governor Connally now standing a better than 50-50 chance of surviving.
President and Mrs. Kennedy were nearing the end of a two-day tour of Texas. They and their party landed at San Antonio yesterday, went to Houston, then flew to Fort Worth last night. They flew to Dallas this morning, were en route to a presidential speaking engagement when the assassin's bullet struck. They were to have flown to Austin, the state capital, for a dinner tonight at the governor's mansion. Vice President Lyndon Johnson, a Texan, was in the same motorcade but some distance back from the president. He was not harmed. Johnson in the hospital when Mr. Kennedy died. But shortly after the death, he was whisked from the hospital under very heavy guard. He was sworn in as the nation's 36th president in the airliner that has flown President Kennedy to Dallas this morning. Immediately afterward, he flew back to the Capitol. Identity of the assassin, not immediately known. Sheriff's officers took a young man into custody near the scene, questioned him behind closed doors. A Dallas television newsman says he saw a rifle being withdrawn from a window on the 5th or 6th floor of the office building. A rifle was found in the staircase on the 5th floor of the building. A top Treasury official says no Secret Service men were injured in the attack on President Kennedy. Moments ago, we were mentioning a bulletin was just handed to us in the identity of the suspect who was picked up at the Texas Theater earlier in the afternoon. A suspect who is reportedly, allegedly, to have shot and killed a Dallas policeman as he chased the suspected assassin of President Kennedy through a movie theater in the South Oak Cliff section. The officer was J.D. Tippett, 38, slain as he and fellow policeman M.N. McDonald ran into the rear exit of the Texas Theater. Tippett and McDonald received a tip the assassin of the president might have gone into the theater. An usher told them a man in a brown shirt had entered the darkened theater just moments before. According to police headquarters, Tippett fired a shot. McDonald rushed the suspect. The suspect said, "It's all over now." McDonald and the suspect sprawled over a seat in the theater. McDonald's face was slashed. Police said it was a 4-inch gash, and the suspect was seized. And the suspect now identified as chairman of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. His name, Lee H. Oswald. And he is, at the moment, the prime suspect in the assassination of the President of the United States. Governor John Connally of Texas was cut down in the same attack, has undergone an operation for a gunshot wound in the chest. And although doctors say Connally is not out of the woods yet, they say his vital signs are good. They say he has a good pulse. His respiration is satisfactory. Another report from the hospital says that the doctors have opened the chest of the governor in an operation and have found several broken ribs and a bruised lung. They say the lung was collapsed by the bullet, but has been reinflated. Doctors report no serious artery damage done to the governor's heart. He'll be in the operating room until around 4:30 p.m., which will be about 35 minutes from this present moment, and then will undergo surgery for a leg wound. The governor wounded twice. As he sat in the back seat of the president's car. Connally's pulse and blood pressure were reported all right at 2:30 p.m. And just moments ago, report that the governor, although still in serious condition, appears to be holding his own, which is gratifying to all citizens, not only of Texas, but of the United States. The president's mother and father learned of the tragedy from a workman at their home in Hyannisport, Massachusetts. Neither has commented. The president's father, Joseph P. Kennedy, is a semi-invalid as a result of a stroke several years ago. In Washington, President Kennedy's brother Edward, a U.S. senator, presiding over the Senate when word of the shooting reached him, he rushed from the chamber. The Senate recessed pending developments. The House was not in session.
You're listening to KBOX Continuing News.
This is Bill Hampton in the KBOX newsroom. Lyndon Baines Johnson is the 36th President of the United States. He took the oath of office officially at 2:39 p.m. Central Standard Time in Dallas this afternoon aboard the same airliner that Mr. Kennedy had flown to Dallas in this morning. Then he flew back to the Capitol, and the late President's body also on the same craft. He'd gone to the hospital immediately after Mr. Kennedy and Governor Connally were shot. After the chief executive's death, Johnson was hurried out of the building under heavy guard and was taken to Love Field. The plane parked in the same place where he had landed about an hour before. With the 55-year-old Johnson, when he took the oath, were his wife and Mrs. Jacqueline Kennedy, the late president's widow. And of course, the developments now: who did the shooting, how many men were killed exactly, officially, and who was the suspect,
and what are the developments in the case at this point. Now we switch to Sam Pate, KBOX Mobile Unit.
Sam Pate from City Hall. The latest details from the press room here is that Captain Will Fritz considers the 24-year-old suspect in custody as a prime suspect. The reports from reliable sources here at City Hall say the suspect holding get two more. The suspect's wife is believed to be a Russian. It's unknown at this time if she is in police custody or not. At the time of the shooting, I was immediately ahead of the motorcade. I noticed the Secret Service men grabbed submachine guns, picked up speed, and run emergency code to Parkland Hospital. Monitoring the secret channel used by Dallas police, I heard Chief Curry tell all available officers to surround the building and see what happened and where and to whom. About that time, the motorcade whizzed past me, but I still couldn't tell if it was the president that had been shot. I immediately broke the news that someone had been shot and that they were being rushed emergency code to Parkland Hospital. But here at City Hall, still no official word that the suspect was the man that killed the president. We do know that he is the one that shot and killed Detective J.D. Tippett. The rifle used in the shooting was found by detectives. That rifle in the crime lab being fingerprinted at this time. Captain Pritz entered the hallway moments ago stating that he couldn't make any further comments at this time. From City Hall, this is Sam Pate for KBOX News.
Here is a bulletin just in. President Kennedy's body will lie in state at the White House tomorrow. This has just been announced by House Speaker John McCormick. McCormick says he thinks the body will be taken to the Capitol Sunday to remain in the Great Rotunda until about noon Monday. There's nothing definite yet on the exact arrangements of the president's funeral. This bulletin just in to us. President Kennedy's body to lie in state at the White House tomorrow. This has just been announced by the House Speaker, John McCormick. McCormick says he thinks the body will be taken to the Capitol Sunday to remain in the Great Rotunda until about noon on Monday. But as for the final arrangements on the funeral, there is nothing definite at the moment. President Johnson is the 8th man to succeed to the office on the death of a president, the 4th to be thrust into the post by an assassination. He was serving in the Senate of the United States as senior senator from Texas and Senate Majority Leader when the then Senator John Kennedy chose him as his running mate in the 1960 election. Mr. Johnson, credited with carrying some of the southern states for the ticket in the paper-thin Democratic victory of that year. He was sworn in as vice president on January 20th, 1961. 2 years, 10 months, 2 days later, Lyndon Johnson is president of the United States. A Yale official in New Haven, Connecticut, says it's undecided at this point whether the Yale-Harvard football game will be played tomorrow. The late president, John F. Kennedy, once played football for the Harvard team. The 46-year-old Kennedy, the 36th and youngest president, lived about 1/2 hour after being shot in the head as his limousine left downtown Dallas. Kennedy dies at the Dallas hospital where he'd been taken in a frantic but futile effort to save his life. He lived long enough to receive the last rites of the Roman Catholic Church. Mr. Kennedy was the first Roman Catholic president in the history of the United States. It was the first death of a president in office since Franklin D. Roosevelt succumbed to a cerebral hemorrhage in Georgia in 1945. Kennedy as the first president to be assassinated since William McKinley was shot in 1901. It's believed that Kennedy's body will be moved shortly to Washington. Funeral services for presidents who die in office usually are held in the capital city. There have been reports amid the confusion created by the assassination that Vice President Johnson had also been wounded, but these reports turned out to be false. The new president and his wife spent about 1/2 hour at the hospital where Kennedy died, and then they left. There was no opportunity to question him. Also denied was a report that Johnson had suffered a mild heart attack. The prime suspect in the case at the moment has been a man by the name of Lee H. Oswald, 24 years old. He has been accused of the slaying of a Dallas policeman shortly after the shooting of the president. Police Captain Pat Ganaway says the suspect was an employee in the building where the rifle was found. Ganaway says the suspect had visited Russia and was married to a Russian, but these reports are not immediately confirmed.
I have a report from Ron Jenkins.
And now we take you to the Parkland Hospital, where KBOX reporter Ron Jenkins is standing by for the latest report on the condition of Governor John Connally.
Ron Jenkins, KBOX News. We're at Parkland Hospital, the temporary press room. Dr. Robert Shaw of the Southwest Medical School has just finished surgery on Governor John Connally and has come forth with the word that all Texas and all of the United States is waiting for. Dr. Shaw said the governor's condition is listed as quite satisfactory. He said the governor went into the operating room in good condition, and he came out in good condition as well. He said the governor was fully conscious during the operation, had no reactions other than the ordinary human found, the doctor said that the main cause of the wound and the main cause of injuries, the bullet wound itself, was fairly clean wound. However, the bullet entered the governor's right shoulder, just lateral to the shoulder blade, and he said it took part of the fifth rib of the governor and shattered it, thereby causing what he called secondary missiles. However, once again, the word that everyone's been waiting for following surgery, Governor John Connally, who had one bullet wound from this morning's incident, is in quite satisfactory condition following surgery here at Parkland Hospital. Further details as they come up. Ron Jenkins, KBOX News.
Assassination of the president by a Dallas newspaper photographer who was riding in a car close behind the presidential car on Friday. There were 5 of us in the car. When we heard the first shot, the president had already turned the corner. We had not made the corner yet, and then we heard 2 more shots. As far as I know, 3 shots were all I heard. I just instinctively looked that way. First, somebody joked about it, saying it was firecrackers. Then, since I was facing the building where the shots were coming from, I glanced up, saw 2 colored men in a window, straining to look at a window above them. And as I looked up to the window above, I saw a rifle being pulled back in the window. It might have been resting on the windowsill. I didn't see a man. I didn't even see if it had a scope on it. The building the man was referring to was the 2nd floor down from the top of the building, and it was the end window facing Elm Street, the corner window. The president's car was about halfway between Houston Street and the underpass, and we were beginning to turn the corner. He, that referring to the gunman, at about a 45-degree angle from the building to the president's car. I looked to my left. I could see both cars speeding off. The president's car and the car behind him carrying the vice president. They disappeared under the underpass. And then I could see a colored family covering up the child in the grass. A policeman was down on his knee. I couldn't tell if he were hit. I thought the child was dead or something. And then the Negro parents picked up the boy, and they ran. As soon as I saw the rifle, I knew someone was trying to kill them, but it never entered my mind that he could be dead. I just couldn't believe it at first. It's going to give Dallas a bad name, I think. The general reaction of all the guys around me was they just couldn't believe a thing like that could happen here. That was an eyewitness report from a news photographer for a Dallas newspaper who was riding in a car close behind the presidential car as it progressed through Dallas this afternoon. The president walked bareheaded and without a coat through a misty rain into the parking lot across the street from Fort Worth Hotel, Texas at 8:45 this morning, the beginning of what was to be a fateful trip for the president. He spoke there to a cheering throng of Democrats who could not get tickets to see him at a breakfast appearance, apologized because Mrs. Kennedy was not with him, that she was organizing herself, and it takes a little longer. At 9 o'clock, the president and Mrs. Kennedy attended the breakfast in the Hotel Texas, sponsored by the Fort Worth Chamber of Commerce. Mrs. Kennedy walked in some minutes late. Her entrance brought tremendous applause from the 2,500 guests who were gathered there. Both were presented Texas boots, and the president got a Texas hat. He declined to put it on in public, joking that he would wear it at the White House next Monday. At 10:35, the president and Mrs. Kennedy left the Texas Hotel by auto for Carswell Air Force Base near Fort Worth, their short flight to Dallas. At 11:37, the president's plane landed at Dallas's Love Field. Mrs. Kennedy emerged from the plane, smiling, shaking hands with airport greeters, and she carried a bouquet of red roses. Young men in the crowd shouted, "Hey, Jackie," and squeezed forward for a closer look of the attractive First Lady. Several young girls screaming over Kennedy as he made his way through the crowd. There was no sign of anti-Kennedy sentiment. They left the motorcade that was to take them over an 11-mile route, including downtown Dallas. And then the clock moved up to 12:30 p.m. The motorcade approached a triple underpass which feeds into Stemmons Expressway, the 5-lane route to the Dallas Trade Mart where Kennedy was to make the luncheon speech. And suddenly, the silence shattered by a series of rifle shots. The president fell face down on the back seat of his car, a bullet in his head. Governor John Connally slumped at his side, wounded in the back. Mrs. Kennedy grasped her husband's head, and she gasped, "Oh no!" And then the motorcade raced to Parkland Hospital near the Trade Mart, and the president was taken to the emergency ward where he received a blood transfusion and then the final rites from a Catholic priest. At 1 p.m., the trip was over. The president had died.
Now to Carl King in Action Central for a live report from Action Central's Sam Pate.
Sam Pate is standing by to make a direct report. Come in, Sam.
Secret Service man and policeman J.D. Tippett. And is being questioned by Captain Will Fritz, the Dallas Homicide Department, Secret Service men, and the FBI. As the suspect was literally dragged down the hallway here at City Hall, he fought, kicked, and cursed police officers and a few newsmen. He killed police officer J.D. Tippett with a .38 caliber snub-nosed revolver. The rifle found at the Texas School Book Supply, commonly called the Sexton Building, believed to be a .30-06 caliber. Still no official word from Captain Fritz that this suspect is the man that shot the president. As the man was brought into City Hall, hundreds of people turning around outside the building cursed the man, shouting, "Kill him, shoot the dirty SOB, shoot him." The man told officers that, "I got me a president and a cop, now I need to get two more." The hallway here at the entrance of the homicide department filled with newsmen awaiting the word from Captain Wilfritz that will either make or break this story suspect-wise. Speculation is that 3 more men were involved in the shooting. Police checking that story out at this time. The man with a clenched fist said that he is a pro-Castro, that he has lived in Russia. He was just now escorted, just moments ago, from Captain Wilfritz's office by a cordon of police officers to an unknown building here in City Hall. Captain Wilfritz made the statement just seconds ago that now the man says that he doesn't admit anything, but he is a prime suspect. Captain Wilfritz says the man is still a prime suspect. From City Hall, this is Sound Base for KBOX News.
Shock and horror were the unanimous reactions as Texans heard of the assassination of President John F. Kennedy and the wounding of Governor John Conley. "It's the darkest day in the history of the great state of Texas," said Lieutenant Governor Preston Smith. "It's a sad tragedy, leaving millions of Texans and other people in the country and the world sad and shocked that something like this could happen in Texas or America. I thought we were through with things like this when Lincoln died," sobbed Jim Dobbs, Republican candidate for Congress in Austin and former narrator for a conservative nationwide radio program. "It's the most horrible thing that has ever happened." It is impossible to comprehend that this assassination of the president and attempted assassination of our governor could occur in the midst of what had been the warmest and friendliest reception that any president had received in Texas within my memory, said former Governor Bryce Daniel, who had served in the U.S. Senate with President Kennedy. The Lieutenant Governor and Speaker Byron Tunnell asked late today that all Texas churches of all faiths conduct a memorial service tonight for the late president and a prayer service for the recovery of the governor. The heads of the 2 houses of the legislature asked all members of the legislature in Austin to gather in the House of Representatives at 8 o'clock tonight for services conducted by chaplains of the House and the Senate. "I am deeply shocked and distressed, as I know all Republicans are, by the tragic death." This said by Republican National Committeeman Albert B. Fay. "I am in deep shock. I'm sure the sympathy of the world is with us now," said U.S. Representative Joe Kilgore of McAllen. "The assassination of President Kennedy has stunned all of us," said Republican State Vice Chairman Mrs. G.N. McDaniel of Borger. Lyndon Baines Johnson is the 36th President of the United States now. He took the oath of office at 2:39 this afternoon, Dallas time, aboard the same airliner that Mr. Kennedy had flown to Dallas in this morning. Then he flew back to the Capitol. The late President's body is on that plane. He had gone to the hospital immediately after Mr. Kennedy and Governor Conley were shot. After the president's death, Johnson was hurried out of the building under heavy guard, taken to Dallas's Love Field. The plane was parked in the same place it had landed in this morning. With the 55-year-old Johnson, when he took the oath, were his wife and Mrs. Jacqueline Kennedy, the late president's widow. Dallas Police Department today arrested a 24-year-old man, Lee H. Oswald, as you have just heard, in connection with the slaying of a Dallas policeman shortly after the president was assassinated. He's also being strongly interrogated to see if he had any connection with the slaying of the president. The man, Oswald, pulled screaming and yelling from the Texas Theater in the Oak Cliff section of Dallas. He brandished a pistol, which officers took away from him after the scuffle. Police officer M.N. McDonald, who was cut across the face in the scuffle, quoted Oswald as saying, after he was subdued, "Well, it's all over. I got me a president and a cop. I'll get 2 more." A large crowd had congregated around the theater witnessing the arrest. Police was told to hold the crowd's backs because many apparently connected the arrested man with the slaying of the president. The slain officer was J.D. Tippett. Ron Jenkins, KBOX Mobile News reporter, has further information.
Hello. President is dead. Throughout the afternoon, brief reports coming into an emergency press room here as to what happened, how different people involved described the tragedy, how they reacted, and a condition report on Governor John Conley of Texas, which you heard moments ago on KBOX. The president is dead, and every doctor, nurse, patient, and newsman here shows the shock and the strain of this, the greatest tragedy of this or perhaps any century, save the crucifixion of Christ. In spite of the obvious deep grief felt by every person here, though, and across the nation as well, there's still ample room for great concern as to the condition of Governor John Conley of Texas. The latest report by the governor's attending physician, Dr. Robert Shaw. Following surgery, he said the governor's condition is quite satisfactory. He came out of the operation in very good shape, and they are quite optimistic toward the governor's fast, full recovery. Dr. Shaw said the governor would probably remain here for 10 to 14 days. Everyone fervently hoping and praying today that this day marked by such a tragedy already would not be further darkened, and now hope has brightened considerably. A Secret Service man relating the story to newsmen here this afternoon said Mrs. Connolly was probably the only person who could relate the most complete facts as to just what happened. Mrs. Connolly said the president, during the parade, was sitting in the right rear seat of the limousine, Mrs. Kennedy the left rear seat. Governor Connolly was sitting in a jump seat directly in front of President Kennedy, and Mrs. Connolly was sitting in another similar jump seat in the left-hand side of the car. Mrs. Connolly said it appeared that the president was hit by the first bullet. They said they were ready to go under the triple underpass on Elm Street. She said in the first shot, the governor half turned toward the president, and he was hit almost instantly, and then the third shot rang out. In fact, Friday night, during press conferences here, a KBOX newsman said, "Look, there's Jack Ruby. I wonder what he's doing here." It's not known what he was doing here. He seems to know many of the people here in the police department, Bill. He has been here almost constantly. Why, we don't know. Perhaps this was the reason. Are there any
One question, Rob. We received unofficial, I repeat that, unofficial comments that Ruby had made a full confession and had given an elaborate explanation to the detectives as to why he shot Lee Oswald, something to the effect, I repeat, this is unofficial, that he didn't want Mrs. Jacqueline Kennedy to suffer anymore. Have you heard anything at all along this line?
I have heard nothing on it, Bill. I will investigate further on my own here. So
All right, let me repeat that what I just said was an unofficial comment we received. All right, Ron Jenkins at City Hall, thank you very much. We know we'll be hearing from you momentarily. We now switch over to newsman Phil Allen.
Exciting events taking place as the tragedy unfolds before the world on the shooting of President Kennedy only Friday, just short now 49 and a half hours ago. At the present time, Jack Ruby is being held at City Hall. You just heard a report from KBOX reporter Ron Jenkins, in which all photographers and reporters at City Hall are going to be searched by police for concealment of any other weapons or any weapons at all.
This is Bill Hampton in the KBOX newsroom. We go immediately to Dick Moore at Parkland Hospital. Go ahead.
Well, Lee Oswald is dead. Dr. Tom Shires made the announcement in the press conference just moments ago that he died at about 1:06. And you'll apologize if we're out of breath. Ran from the emergency room to our unit here. Again, though, he died from a bullet wound in his side. The first indication we got of the extreme severity of the wound was about 45 minutes ago when we were told that the chest cavity had been cut open and that open heart surgery was taking place. Then he was put on the pacemaker to keep his heart beating through electronic impulses. That also failed. Again, Lee Oswald, 24 years old, accused assassin of President John Fitzgerald Kennedy, died at 1:06 at Parkland Hospital. Dick Moore, KBOX Mobile News.
The ironic event of the century undoubtedly today in the city of Dallas, Texas. An accused assassin who allegedly shot and killed the 35th President of the United States while he was riding downtown in a motorcade in Dallas yesterday has himself been shot and killed less than 24 hours later. Lee Oswald died at Parkland Hospital just 10 feet away from where President John F. Kennedy died yesterday at Parkland Hospital. Oswald died at officially 1:26 Central Standard Time in the emergency room here in Dallas this afternoon. How can one describe these turn of events? One crazed man, one demented mind, one so-called despicable person kills a president. Less than 24 hours later, he himself is shot and killed. For further late developments on this ironic turn of events, we now switch to Jerry Kunkel at City Hall. Go ahead, Jerry.
To hold the crowds back here, to try to get the information out, very cooperative with the press. They know the people. They know the people want the information. They know that the press is the only means by which they can get the information out, and they're doing everything they can to cooperate. The Dallas Police Department, I think, has been highly underrated through the whole thing. They should get credit, laurels of all sorts. They have done a remarkable job. They continue to do so as quickly
quickly as the information is able for release, why, of course, they have been getting it to us. We'll have it. We'll be bringing it to you.
We also heard reported from Dick Moore at Parkland Hospital that the surgeon said the bullet appeared to be a .38 caliber. This is, the doctor reiterated that he was no expert on bullets, but to him the bullet did appear to be a .38. It was the bullet which he removed from the stomach of Lee Harvey Oswald. Lee Harvey Oswald, incidentally, as a side note, did not make any comment after he was shot.
Right, this is Bill Hampton back in the KBOX newsroom. The black-haired accused assassin of the president had walked out of City Hall a few hours ago and to his death, handcuffed with a tiny smile on his lips. However, according to some eyewitnesses, he may have spotted his killer just an instant before he was shot. One eyewitness puts it this way: "I'm sure he saw the man. It's my feeling he knew the gun was going to fire because he jerked his hands toward his stomach in sort of a reflex action even before I heard the shot." One of the four surgeons who worked on Oswald at Parkland Hospital, Dr. Malcolm Perry, the physician who tried to save the president just 48 hours ago. He said the bullet punctured Oswald's spleen, pancreas, right kidney, and liver, and lodged just under the skin on the right side near the back. Police Chief Curry had arranged a public transfer of Lee Oswald from one jail to another in response to pleas of newsmen covering the case. He said after the slaying, "If I hadn't promised you people I would not take Oswald until this morning, we would have taken him during the night. But I told you what I did, and I wouldn't back down on my pledge." Hospital Administrator C.J. Price at Parkland said attendants on duty had been warned of the possibility of just such an attempt on Lee Oswald's life in Dallas today. Thus, they were on hand when the alert came from City Hall after the shooting at the City Hall basement.
However, Oswald was double handcuffed, and it was just impossible to do at the time. It was too much of a crowd. Ruby ran up, shoved the pistol into his side, pulled the trigger, and that, of course, was the end of the assassin. So that's the way it looks here at City Hall at this hour.
That was Ron Jenkins from City Hall with the latest report from that vicinity, describing to us what is going on there. We are keeping up-to-the-minute reports coming from City Hall and Parkland Hospital. The last reports we had from Parkland Hospital was from Dick Moore, in which he stated the feelings of the people gathered at Parkland were mixed. Their comments were mixed. We are looking for some of those comments at the moment, which we wrote down at the time Dick was telling us over the air. They said they seemed to feel cheated, as we mentioned a moment ago. Drawn into the background has been the actual transfer of the president's body to the Capitol Rotunda. Ordinarily, this would be of the utmost importance to citizens, but with the new events reaching, the new violence reaching into the news, it has been pushed into the background. A caisson drawn by the 7 matched gray horses moved along Washington's Pennsylvania Avenue today, carrying President Kennedy's body to the Capitol building for the last time.
The president's car is now turning onto Elm Street, and it will be only a matter of minutes before he arrives at the trademark. I was on Stemmons Freeway earlier, and even the freeway was jam-packed with spectators waiting their chance to see the president as he made his way toward the trademark. Hospital has been advised to stand by for a severe gunshot wound. I repeat, a shooting in the motorcade in the downtown area. Parkland Hospital has been advised to stand by for a severe gunshot wound. The president's car is now going past me. The limousine is now traveling at a very high rate of speed. Secret Service men standing up in the limousine. They are armed with submachine guns. It appears as though someone in the limousine might have
eagle over whoever is in the car, the President and Mrs. Kennedy, and as we understand, Governor and Mrs. Connolly. At this point, it looks as though it could have been one or two or even all of the people within the car may have been the victims, may have been struck by shots. We don't know. Parkland Hospital in the distance. Now on Harry Hines Boulevard, following behind the motorcade. Many, many police officers, maybe 20 or 25 motorcycle policemen falling in behind at the trademark. A huge crowd left behind, waiting expectantly to see the President. The motorcade now perhaps 2 or 3 blocks ahead of me. They're approaching the entrance now to Parkland Hospital, traveling at a high rate of speed. Already police cars converging on Parkland from every angle, from every point. I'm pulling in now toward Parkland Hospital, coming to the approach. There's an officer waving me down. He's waving me around. There's a cordon. There's already a cordon of police officers running from their cars, from their vehicles here. The official party, as I can see it, pulling around toward the emergency room of Parkland Hospital. The policeman says, no, you cannot come in here. You cannot come in here. We'll let nobody else in. I'm going to try to go around to the back of Parkland. I'm going around now, and I will try to get around to the back of Parkland and find out more details. It was definitely the President's car. We could see the First Lady's pink suit. That's the only identification we could see, but we know it is the President's car. Another car directly behind the presidential car. There were also parties in that car. Another Secret Service man spread eagle over them. We don't know. Perhaps there was some hid in that car as well. We're not sure. Coming around behind Parkland Hospital, more details as we have them. Ron Jenkins, KBOX Mobile Unit, number 6.